Good afternoon and welcome to the latest of the Stargate sci-fi called Classics documentary. I'm delighted to be joined by Paul McGillion, who played the role of Carson Beckett in Stargate Atlantis. And I suppose, Paul, one thing that I'm going to start you off with, I suppose I asked a few of the cast members already who appeared in Stargate Atlantis, and it's almost now a decade or more since you appeared on the show as Carson Beckett. Does it almost feel like that, or does it feel like almost yesterday you were on stage shooting at those scenes and episodes? Is it a bit surreal that a decade has gone by?
It is. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure also to chat about Stargate, and especially to an Irishman. So it's a real pleasure. It feels like a while ago, but at the same time, it feels like yesterday. You know, we had so much fun doing the show. It was just such a great fun being part of it. You know, and it's a franchise that is it's bigger than life. It's a gift that keeps on giving because we have an opportunity over the years to go to conventions all over the world. You know, and that's a really rare thing for television, and certainly in the sci-fi industry, it's something I never really knew about before I did the show.
Yeah, and I suppose, Paul, ye had big shoes to fill in terms of the Big Brother following in his footsteps, a sort of a spin-off show. And I remember speaking to Joe Flanagan, who played John Shepherd, and he was telling me that there was a bit of tension, a bit nervous excitement, first of all, because you didn't know where you were going to be accepted by the sort of Stargate sort of family in terms of the Big Brother, how it was going to react, a whole new sort of cast. And was that sort of a daunting experience given how successful and how universally popular Stargate SG-1 was worldwide?
Well, it was more exciting than daunting. I'm from Vancouver, so we spent a number of years with SG1, and I had the pleasure of playing a character called Ernest Littlefield in Torment to Tantalus in SG1. So I'm familiar with the series. You know, he was the first person to go through the Stargate in the series. But that being said, when we started doing Atlantis, it was very interesting. But we had the great honor of being on the set at the same time with the SG1 cast, and they were so great to us. You know, Amanda and Chris and Michael and Richard and everybody. You know, they just really brought us under their wing. So it was actually more of a comforting thing than anything else to have them around. And they were great. They kind of showed us the rope, so to speak.
And Paul, you mentioned that you played a character role in Stargate SG-1. Did new producers, Stargate Atlantis, had they that in mind in terms of Stargate Atlantis, in terms of that role that you played in Stargate SG-1? So were you sought out for the role of Carson Beckett, or was it something that you came about and that your agent brought to you and you went through numerous audition processes, or did you think they had, were you, was your in mind for that character?
Yeah, I'll answer that. It's just funny because you're just going off. I love it. No, that was a completely different character. Ernest Littlefield is very, very different. He was in season one in a very interesting, iconic episode. But years later, I wondered why, because a lot of my friends ended up playing different characters on SG1, and I never got a chance to play on the show again after I did that guest star. And then when I did get on Atlantis, I talked to Martin Wood, who directed the pilot. I said, "Can I ask you a question? How come I never went back on SG1?" He goes, "Have you done a convention yet?" I said, "No." And he goes, "Oh, I see." I said, "What?" And he goes, "You'll see, because you had a very iconic character. My character went through the Stargate," and he said, we couldn't have you back again. It was a very important character." And I said, "You'll see." And I had never been to conventions. I didn't realize the fan base that the show had. So it was completely different. I read for Carson Becker, and at the time they wanted an international flavor to the character. And the casting director said, "What are you going to do with it?" To my agent, what accent? And I said, "I'm going to do a Scottish accent." I was born in Paisley, Scotland, and I just, when I read the pilot and the sides for the pilot, the excerpts out of the script, it was very comedic. He's like, "I'm not getting in that bloody chair for God's sake." So I'm not doing it. It felt very Scottish to me, And I said, "I'm going to do that." And then he called back and told me, "No, tell him not to do that. I want him to do an English accent." I said, "Why?" He goes, "No, no one understands you if you're Scottish." And I said, I'm sure the Irish understand that as well, right? But I said, no, I feel strongly about this. So I went in and I said, he said, "What accent are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to do an educated Scottish accent." So I did that. And I did the first scene. He was like, "That was good." Second scene, he's like, "That was good." Third scene, he goes, "Okay, good, get out." And I was the first person cast on the show. So I kind of stuck to my guns and kept with the Scottish accent. But I think that was a good thing for me, and there's certainly a lot, I have a great fan base because of it, I think. And yeah, and I've been to Ireland several times and did signings in Dublin and Belfast, and they love the Scottish character as well. So it's a pleasure to do this.
And I suppose, Paul, you mentioned that you had appeared in Stargate SG-1, so you knew the size of the project and the sheer scale of the resources available to the Stargate. So you probably weren't taken back the first day on set in terms of Stargate Atlantis, in terms of that production, were you? Because you were familiar of the big machine that was Stargate.
I was a little bit, but when you walk onto a new stage and you see the whole Atlantis gate room and everything, it's quite overwhelming. And then Robert Patrick was in the pilot, and the amount of background performers we had, so you really knew you had, the gravity of it. You knew this wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't going away soon. It was just a massive production, and to be a part of that, and being the first group that's going through the gate, on Atlantis, it was very special. I'll never forget that. It was a very special moment, and yeah, it was. I always keep that close to me.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of Stargate Atlantis, normally when characters die off or meet their demise in a series, they don't come back. And you've the distinguished of the of only person really in both of the Stargate universes, Stargate SG-1 or Stargate Atlantis, of making your death, but making your reprisal as well. I know some other characters had dream sequences or something where they probably died and came back, but you're the first actually character to die off and re-emerge out of the blue.
That's the beauty of sci-fi, my friend. And then come back as a clone. And I didn't know how, when the fans had a big protest. They had busloads of people here at Bridge Studios lined up, and all the girls were flashing their underwear to the studio, and they had bagpipers and everything. And it was on the news that they're so upset the character died, and had a pipe band rally for him. And so, when they asked me to come back, I said, well, how are we going to do that? And Joe Malazzi told me, well, it's sci-fi. We can do it. And he told me the storyline. I thought it was very clever, and only in sci-fi, my friend. Sci-fi and soap operas, I think.
And I suppose, Paul, in terms of Stargate SG-1, and in terms of that significance as well, and how important was it to the success of Stargate Atlantis? You spoke about that bond and close relationship, and numerous of the Stargate SG-1 did cameo appearances in Stargate Atlantis for 1 or 2 episodes throughout the seasons, and that almost felt that brought that sort of continuity and probably linked the shows together.
It certainly did. You're right. I mean, it was so in the pilot. We had Richard Dean Anderson, and we had Michael Shanks, and that was really amazing being on set with them. And I think the fan base loved that. They loved the crossovers like that, and it was really great. Like I said, we shot both those shows simultaneously for a number of years on the same studio. Whereas when Atlantis was finished, Stargate Universe came along, and we never worked with any of that crew. We never saw them at all. So it was almost like it was these 2 shows, and then that show came on a little bit later. So we had the benefit of being, I think we had a very similar tone to SG-1. And I think that was, we tried to honor that. And the writers obviously do an amazing job, Brad and Robert, keeping the show fresh and new and different with different characters, but also bringing back the homage to SG-1 at times with, bringing back in the characters to cross over. And I think it's a great thing. Fan base loves that.
Yeah, and I suppose that David, you're on set sort of chemistry, the Jekyll and Hyde relationship that you had with Rodney, David Ewers. That was probably
more Oscar and Felix.
Yeah. It was probably comedy gold in many senses. It almost reminded me of Porridge or something, a Ronnie sort of Barker sort of episode, David type of relationship, as you're probably aware of those iconic legends that sort of feed off each other. That probably brought an awful lot of humor and sort of light-hearted entertainment. So what's sometimes serious content.
Yeah, it was a great relationship, and David and I just have a really good chemistry when we're acting together, and on and off the screen. It was a great friendship, and to be able to work with somebody like that you have similar rhythms and acting, and it was always a pleasure to do those scenes. And we had lots of comedic scenes and also dramatic scenes that, towards the end, we had lots of scenes that have some gravity towards them as well. But I mean, just having an acting partner like that's always a pleasure, and it makes for good chemistry and good storylines.
I suppose, Paul, it's roughly now 25 years since the one and only Stargate movie. I think there's a real draw and a real appetite now is coming into the 21st century where we're seeing all these sort of movie remakes in terms of the Dark Knight, the Joker, the sort of adult, sort of teen sort of movies that we're getting. That in terms of the Stargate, do you think it's now is the time, the right time? Roughly, it's been a while since the last Stargate TV series for a movie to come out. I imagine it would have a big, massive sort of appeal. There's probably a lot more they could do with it now than what they could have done with it back in the early 90s.
I agree. I think the fan base is there certainly for it, and I think the great thing about Stargate, and like I said, the opportunity to travel all over the world, including places like Ireland, is you see families grew up with the show, and I see the same families at conventions years after years, and they have a huge appetite for it, and I think the show's about escapism. I mean, the gate's the star of the show, and every episode you go through a different journey, and I think people need that right now, especially the climate that we're in, with the COVID days and everything else that's going around in the world. I think it's a perfect time to have another Stargate happening. I think there's a huge appetite for it, like you say.
And Paul, what did you make of your own Carson Becker character? You mentioned you saw him as a sort of a Scottish sort of and you saw him but in terms of, I suppose, his personal traits, would you just felt that he was probably a character that had good-hearted, sort of goodwill to everyone, and probably sometimes that probably led to a bit of demise that you saw the good in everyone, even though sometimes people had a more sinister intent.
Well, I think he's, for me, it was such a great character to play because, like I said, I had an opportunity to do a lot of comedic things, but also a lot of dramatic things as an actor. It's always a pleasure to do that, and like that's one of the reasons I want to, make him Scottish because I think that the Scots wear their hearts on their sleeves, and there's a comedic aspect as well, and there's a braveness there as well, that you get a chance to work on as an actor, and I always kind of saw him a little bit like the Cowardly Lion, but eventually gets up enough bravery, to do things. And yeah, and all's very warm. A lot of times they refer to him as the heart, of Atlantis, and some people have said that, not me, but it was also kind of a kindness about the character that was very endearing, I think, to people, and a warmth about him that is also a lot of fun to play as an actor. And obviously we have a tremendous cast to work with and great writing. It all adds together.
Yeah, and I suppose, Paul, you mentioned you've been at many conventions all over the world in terms of Stargate since its series, and I suppose sometimes people do question in terms of the relation of making stars or legacies or legends out of certain characters. But the character Jack O'Neill, it sort of morphed the whole Stargate universe. And in terms of, I know Richard Dean Anderson's the big star from what he is in terms of MacGyver, but the Jack O'Neill character just went to a different sort of planet in terms of its legacy, in terms of sci-fi, and it really, even to this day, everybody seems to know who associates Jack O'Neill with Richard Dean Anderson, and Richard Dean Anderson, they seem to can't get away from each other. He's almost made a godlike figure.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's an iconic sci-fi character, that's for sure. And he's the true leader of that show, and Richard has a super unique quality about him as an actor, and there's a charisma that's undeniable. And I think when you have somebody like that as a lead of your show, you're in for a good ride, And I think he did that and paved the way, as well as the rest of the SG1 cast for the success of the other franchise.
And Paul, in terms of your working week now, I know it's going back a while in terms of Stargate Atlantis, but in terms when you came on to, I know you're heavily involved in the seasons. Was it a 7-day turnaround to shoot one episode? Was there numerous shooting locations on set and then off-set locations? And from the first time you got the table read to the finished live product, were you talking 6-7 days per episode?
We wouldn't always do table reads. We did table reads off at the starting, and then you'd look at something like from 7 to 9 days for an episode, depending on how much what locations you're on or whatnot. If you're if it was in studio, it'd be a little shorter. We're doing locations depending on how big the episodes were. Some episodes had a lot more involved, so it would take longer. You have to do pickup days later, but it depended on the episode. But did try to shoot them in 7 to 9 days, I think.
All right. And Paul, lastly, for me, I suppose this is the question I finish off all the episodes in relation to the documentary on, is probably the hardest question I'm going to ask you now. If they put your character, Carson Beckett, in a Stargate sci-fi dictionary, and they left two blank sentences underneath, and they asked you, Paul McGillion, to write those two sentences as your portrayal of Carson Beckett having played him. What would you like those two sentences to read?
I think Dr. Carson Beckett is a man with a moral compass and a sense of humor.
Perfect. On that note, Paul McGillion, an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening to relive your memories of playing the role of Dr. Carson Beckett in Stargate Atlantis, as we look and relive the iconic moments of the Stargate universe, really and truly a sci-fi cult classic. Pleasure talking to you, Paul, and who knows, there's probably a new Stargate movie in the works, and we probably might see you in a cameo role, please God, in that in the near future. Take care, Paul.
We love that. It was absolutely my pleasure. God bless the Irish.
Thanks a lot.